If you've just discovered you've been named as the executor of someone's will, you might be wondering, what am I supposed to do now? In this video, I'll show you the 5 things every executor should do first, in the right order, so you avoid the mistakes that catch most first-time executors out. I'm James Long. I've spent years helping families through the probate and estate administration process, and I'm going to share that knowledge with you. Let's start with priority number 1. Before you contact banks, before you start valuing assets, and certainly before you think about distributing any money, the first thing you should do is find the most recent valid will and read it carefully from beginning to end. Now, that might sound obvious, but you'll be surprised how many people simply look to see who inherits what and then put the will back in its envelope. The will contains much more than that. It tells you who has been appointed as the executor, whether there are any substitute executors if someone can't act, or whether there are any specific gifts that need to be dealt with, and sometimes it even includes funeral wishes or other instructions. So take your time, read it once and then again. You're not expected to memorize it, but you do need to understand what it says before you start making decisions. Practical tip: if there is an original paper will, treat it with care. Don't remove any staples, please. Don't write notes on it. Don't hole punch it or attach anything to it, because if probate is required, you will usually need to send the original will to the probate registry. So it's really important to keep it in exactly the condition you found it in. If you would like to make notes, take a photocopy or scan it instead and work from that copy. But what if you can't find a will? Sometimes, despite everyone's best efforts, no will can be found. If that's the case, don't assume there never was one. Ask family members. Speak to the person's solicitor if they had one. Check whether they used a professional will writer. Check the National Will Register. I've put a link in the description to that. Some people also store wills with banks or specialist will storage companies. It's worth making reasonable inquiries before concluding that there isn't one. But what if there really isn't a will? If no valid will exists, the estate is described as being intestate. That means that everything becomes possible still, but it does mean that a different set of legal rules apply. Instead of executors, someone will usually apply to become the administrator of the estate, and the law decides who inherits according to the rules of intestacy. Those rules often produce results that surprise families. For example, unmarried partners don't automatically inherit under the rules of intestacy, no matter how long they've been together. I've made a separate video explaining exactly how intestacy works, who can apply to administer the estate, and who inherits when there's no will. If that's your situation, I would recommend watching that after you finish this video, and I've linked it in the video description. Now, one more important point. You might discover that more than one executor has been appointed, and that is perfectly normal. In fact, many wills appoint 2 or more executors. If everyone is willing and able to act, you'll normally make the important decisions together. If one executor doesn't want to act or can't act, there are procedures that may allow the remaining executors to continue, depending on the circumstances. Don't worry, we'll cover some of those situations in future videos. Before we move on, at this point you might be thinking, I've read the will, now what? The next priority isn't about paperwork at all. It's about protecting the estate. Because before you start contacting organisations or valuing assets, you need to make sure nothing is lost, damaged or overlooked. And now that you've read the will and understand who has been appointed to deal with the estate, it's time for priority number 2. Secure the estate. Before you start thinking about probate applications, valuations or distributing inheritances, your immediate responsibility is to protect the estate, protect the assets that make up the estate. Now, think of it this way. Until the estate has been administered, you effectively are looking after someone else's property. And that means taking sensible steps to make sure nothing is lost, damaged or overlooked. For some estates, that might simply mean gathering together important paperwork. For others, it could involve securing an empty house, looking after valuable possessions, or making sure a vehicle is safely stored. There's no single checklist that applies to every estate, but there are some common things you should think about. If the deceased owns their own home, make sure it's locked and secure. If other family members have keys, make sure everyone knows who's responsible for the property. If the house is going to remain empty for any length of time, it should be checked regularly. Not only is that sensible from a security point of view, but many insurance policies actually require it. Practical tip: if the property is unoccupied, contact the buildings insurer as soon as reasonably possible. And many insurers need to know when a property becomes vacant, and some policies impose conditions such as regular inspections or limits on how long a property can remain empty. It is much better to have that conversation early than discover there's a problem if you ever need to make a claim. It's also worth thinking about valuables, jewellery, cash, collectibles, important documents. If there are items that could easily be misplaced or accidentally thrown away, make sure they're stored somewhere safe until you've established exactly what forms part of the estate. And the same applies to vehicles. If the deceased owned a car, don't assume it's insured for someone else to drive simply because it's parked on the driveway. You'll need to check the insurance position before anybody uses it. Another practical step is arranging for the post to be redirected, and that helps ensure important letters from banks, pension providers, utility companies and government departments aren't missed. It also reduces the risk of sensitive information falling into the wrong hands. Now, one question I'm often asked is, should I start clearing the house straight away? In most cases, I would suggest taking your time. Families are often understandably keen to begin sorting through possessions, but it's usually better to wait until you've identified what belongs to the estate. Some items have significant financial value. Others may have sentimental importance to family members. And occasionally, something that looks insignificant turns out to be extremely important. For example, share certificates, premium bonds, life insurance policies, or even the original will itself. Practical tip: before anyone starts clearing a property, walk through every room with your phone and take photographs. They're invaluable if there's ever any disagreement later about what was in the property, and they can also help you remember where important documents or valuables were kept. The purpose of this priority isn't to organise the entire estate. It's simply to make sure everything is safe while you work out exactly what you're dealing with. Once you've done that, you're ready for the next stage: building a complete picture of the estate. Because before you can decide whether probate is needed or eventually distribute any inheritance, you first need to know exactly what the deceased owned and what they owed. Now that you've secured the estate, it's time for priority number 3: build a picture of the estate. At this stage, you're not trying to value everything down to the last penny. You're simply trying to answer 2 very important questions. What did the deceased own, and what did they owe? Once you know the answer to those 2 questions, almost every other decision becomes much easier. So start by making a simple list. Think about assets first. That might include bank and building society accounts, savings, ISAs, investments and shares, pensions, life insurance policies, property, vehicles, premium bonds, business interests, valuable personal possessions such as jewellery, antiques, or collections. And then think about liabilities, for example, mortgages, credit cards, personal loans, utility bills, care home fees, any tax owed, funeral expenses, any other debts. And don't worry if you can't find everything immediately. Very few executors can. Almost every estate starts with missing information, and it's perfectly normal to discover additional assets or liabilities as you work through the administration. The important thing is simply to start building the picture. Practical tip: don't rely on memory. Create a spreadsheet, use a notebook, or use an estate administration checklist. Whatever works best for you. But record everything in one place as you discover it, and it will save you hours later. One question I'm often asked is, how do I actually find all these accounts? The answer is usually by following the paperwork. What is that? It can be bank statements, letters, emails, tax returns, online banking, pension correspondence. Sometimes one document leads you to another organisation you didn't even know existed. It's a bit like putting together a jigsaw puzzle. Each piece helps reveal the whole picture. You might also discover that some assets don't actually form part of the estate. For example, jointly owned property may pass automatically to the surviving owner. Some pensions are paid at the discretion of the pension trustees. And certain life insurance policies are written in trust and therefore sit outside the estate altogether. We'll cover these topics in separate videos because they're important in their own right, or you can visit probatesupporthub.co.uk for more information now. I've put a link to that in the description. For now, your objective is simply to identify everything that might need investigating. Practical tip. As you contact organisations, make a note of who you spoke to, the date, any reference numbers, and what they told you. You'll often need to come back to the same organisation several weeks later, and having those details written down can save a huge amount of time and frustration. Once you've built a reasonable picture of the estate, you're ready to answer one of the biggest questions every executor asks. Do I actually need probate? Because despite what many people believe, not every estate requires a grant of probate before it can be administered. And that's exactly what we'll look at in priority number 4. It's probably the question I hear more than any other. But the answer to that question is actually maybe. One of the biggest misconceptions about administering the estate is that probate is always required. In fact, many estates can be dealt with without ever applying for a grant of probate. Whether probate is needed depends on a number of factors, including what assets the deceased owned, how those assets were owned, their overall value, and the requirements of the organisations holding those assets. For example, many banks will release smaller balances without probate, although every bank has its own policies and financial limits. Likewise, assets that were owned jointly may pass automatically to the surviving owner without needing probate at all. So don't assume that simply because someone has died, your first job is completing a probate application. In many cases, it isn't. Practical tip: before spending time completing probate forms, contact each bank or financial institution and ask whether they require a grant of probate before releasing the funds. You may find that some organisations will release the money immediately, while others will require probate. Knowing that early helps you decide what needs to happen next. Another question I'm often asked is, can I start contacting banks before I've obtained probate? The answer is absolutely yes. In fact, that's exactly what executors are expected to do. You can notify organisations of the death, ask what information they hold, request balances, and find out what they'll need from you. What you usually can't do is close the accounts or access funds until they've received the documents they require, which may or may not include a grant of probate. So don't think you have to sit and wait until probate has been granted before you start administering the estate. There's often plenty you can do in the meantime. If you are still unsure whether probate will actually be required for the estate you're dealing with, I've made a separate video that explains exactly how to decide. It covers the situations where probate is needed, when it isn't, and the factors that influence the decision. I've linked that video in the description below, and I would recommend watching it once you finish this one. And now, even if probate isn't required, there's one habit that every good executor should develop from day one. It takes almost no effort, but it can save hours of work later and help protect you if ever anyone asks any questions about how you've administered the estate. So let's move to priority number 5, which is keeping good records. You don't need to be an accountant. You don't need complicated software. But you do need a clear record of what you've done and why you've done it. As an executor, you're responsible for administering someone else's estate. And that means beneficiaries are entitled to understand how you've managed it, and if questions arise later, good records can help you answer them quickly and confidently. Think of your records as the story of the estate. Every letter you send, every phone call you make, every valuation you obtain, every bill you pay, every penny that comes in or goes out, it all forms part of that story. If you feel you need practical guidance, you might like to purchase our downloadable guide, the Complete Executor Bundle, which also includes tools for your use. A link is included in the description below. Or if you prefer to use a solicitor, you can complete the contact form on our website, probatesupporthub.co.uk, and you'll be contacted. Practical tip: create one place where everything is stored. That could be a folder on your computer, a ring binder, or an estate administration spreadsheet. Whatever system you choose, use it consistently. Don't keep some information in emails, some in notebooks and some in your head. Your future self will thank you. One of the biggest mistakes first-time executors make is assuming they'll remember everything, and they really won't, unfortunately. Estate administration often takes several months, and in some cases more than a year. You will be speaking to banks, insurers, pension providers, HM Revenue and Customs, utility companies and beneficiaries. By the time you come back to an organisation several weeks later, it's very easy to forget who you spoke to or what was agreed. A few simple notes made at the time can save hours of frustration later. Practical tip: whenever you contact an organisation, write down the date, the name of the person that you spoke to, any reference number, what was discussed, and what the next step is. If you send documents, keep copies wherever possible. If you receive important letters, file them in date order. These small habits make administering an estate much easier. Good records also make preparing the estate accounts much simpler. So at that point, every executor should be able to explain what assets came into the estate and what debts and expenses were paid and how the remaining estate was distributed. That's to the beneficiaries. If you've kept good records throughout the administration, preparing those accounts is usually straightforward. If you haven't, it can become one of the most stressful parts of the entire process. And finally, remember this: many people become executors only once in their lives. You're not expected to know everything on day one. The law doesn't expect perfection. It expects you to act honestly, take reasonable care, and make decisions in the best interests of the estate. If you're organised, methodical, and willing to ask questions when you're unsure, you're already well on your way to being a good executor. So, those are the 5 priorities every executor should focus on first. 1, read the will carefully or establish whether there is one. 2, secure the estate. 3, build a picture of what the deceased owned and owed. 4, find out whether probate is actually needed. And 5, keep good records throughout the process. If you tackle those 5 priorities one step at a time, you'll avoid many of the mistakes that catch first-time executors out, and you'll give yourself a solid foundation for everything that comes next. If you have benefited from watching this video, do subscribe for more videos to come. Have a look at the channel now for more videos about probate and what to do after someone passes, and please hit the like button. It helps other people to find this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.